What I try to do is make them understand this is you. These people, these pictures that I'm showing, that's you, right? That's your friend. This is not, somebody else. This is what happened to them. Sadly, probably will happen to you if you go down this road. I'm not afraid to go there.
In this episode, I sat down with Rocky Herron. Rocky is a retired DEA agent. He served in that capacity for over 30 years, served in the United States as well as abroad in Bolivia for a period of 6 years. He raised his family there. Rocky and I talk about a fascinating range of topics related to his work as a DEA agent, but most importantly, his current work as an employee of the San Diego County Office of Education as an anti-drug and anti-alcohol ambassador in the county's schools. We touch on the fentanyl crisis in America, what preceded it, his take on what he defines as a pill-popping culture in the United States, and much, much more. This was a fascinating opportunity for me to sit down with someone who is passionate about his job and, most importantly, passionate about protecting children. He has done this work not only in the United States, but abroad in 17 countries. And ironically, he shared that the reception that he receives in Mexico, for example, at the federal level, is a much warmer reception than he has received in the United States. So lots to unpack in this interview. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I did having this conversation. Welcome to the Superintendent's Hangout, where we discuss topics in education, charter schools, life in general, and not necessarily in that order. I'm your host, Dr. Sharetta. Come on in and hang out. Welcome, Rocky. Thank you so much for coming in this afternoon in the middle of a winter storm here in San Diego.
I'm happy to be here, Dave.
I was wondering if we could start out where I start all these conversations with you sharing a bit about your background, where you come from, what your history is, and what inspired you to ultimately pursue a career in law enforcement and then bringing you to your current work in schools.
Well, I'm a retired DEA special agent. I did that for 31 years. And now I work for the County of San Diego Office of Education, doing drug prevention talks in schools. But I grew up here in San Diego. I went to Francis Parker, grew up privileged. But I had seen what drugs had done to people around me. And at an early age, I had a kind of a chip on my shoulder. I was offered weed when I was 12 and made the decision that, don't need to find out what that does for me. But when I was 18 in high school, Kiki Camarena was a DEA agent who was kidnapped and murdered in Mexico. And he was a San Diego guy. His next posting after Mexico was going to be San Diego. And what happened to Kiki really shocked me. It shocked the country. Yeah. And it started a whole red ribbon concept. But at 18, I began to ponder, well, maybe that's something I could do someday, not believing I could ever actually get the job. But I went to college up in LA, and I came back from college, and everyone told me I needed to go to law school, except the only problem was I didn't want to be a lawyer. So I threw a crazy Hail Mary application in with DEA, and they hired me at 23. So I came out of the academy, came back here to San Diego, spent 8 years doing cases here on the border with Tijuana, plenty of work. And after 8 years, I was rewarded with a transfer to Bolivia in South America, and spent 6.5 years for DEA in Bolivia. And then I came back to San Diego and finished my career here. And I'm in education really accidentally. So about 17 years ago now, two things happened almost simultaneously. One, we discovered the OxyContin epidemic here in San Diego. And it had been here, we just weren't paying attention to it. We were focused on cocaine and meth and heroin. But we discovered in 2008, roughly, that we had a significant youth OxyContin problem. And in the DEA, we don't chase drug users. But the problem with OxyContin, it's so addictive and it was so expensive that a large number of kids who got addicted in high school ended up as young adults being dealers. They had to sell OxyContin to be able to afford their own. So we'd arrest these kids, and often I would offer to drive them to jail. And that's an amazing period of time when even the hardcore drug dealers seemed willing to talk, the last drive before
Right.
jail. And I'd ask these beautiful kids from the best families and the best schools and best communities in San Diego, and not your traditional drug trafficking population. I'd ask these kids, why did you start? When did you start? What made you think it was safe? Who offered it to you? All of these kids, young men and women, would start crying, all of them. And they all said something like, if only somebody would have warned me. If only somebody had told me how bad it was going to be, maybe I wouldn't have started. And I'd look at him and say, shut up, you wouldn't listen to anybody. Because at that time, I didn't think anybody would listen. And almost simultaneously, I discovered my own daughters here in elementary school in San Diego were not getting any organized drug prevention. I didn't know that DARE had been driven out of the schools and not replaced. And those two issues kind of collided in me and made me realize we're failing our kids. I mean, we're not educating our kids about the risk of drug abuse. And so that's where I am. I don't really quite know why kids listen to me, but they do. And half my time I spend here in San Diego, and half my time I'm spending traveling in the U.S. and Mexico teaching.
So as you mentioned to me when we were chatting before hitting record, there are a number of folks obviously around the country who do similar work, except to your knowledge, none of them are employed by a school district or a county office of education. They're mostly freelancers. How did you come to this position, and how did, I'm assuming, Dr. Gotthold reached out to you, or you met him somewhere, or how did that work?
Well, it was interesting to me. Several years ago, the assistant superintendent reached out to me, a new assistant superintendent in San Diego for the County Office of Ed, and said, Dr. Gotthold thinks the world of you. And I'm, who's that? And she was shocked. And I said, I don't know who he is. And she goes, well, he talks all about you. And I found out later that he had been hearing from other education leaders in San Diego about the work I was doing in the schools, even though I never met him. And when I retired 2 years ago, and I want to give him enormous credit for this, he saw an opportunity to bring me inside his school district. So they created this position. And it's an outward-facing position, and Paul Gotthold has empowered me to speak to any school, charter, military, parochial, public, doesn't matter, any community group, any church group, anybody in the community that will listen. And that's my job, to get out in front of the community and share this message. And as you said, I'm connected on social media to other people doing this, and I'm not aware of anybody that's doing it from within a school system. And that surprises me, given the extent of the drug problem today.
You talked about, I think it was in one of the podcasts that I listened to in preparation for today, you talked about when you came back to the U.S. after having spent the time in Bolivia, and your daughters, I think their first language was Spanish, and they were immersed in Bolivia. That was their home country, essentially. And they came back and they asked you about some TV commercials that they saw. Can you talk? It's tongue in cheek. It's a funny anecdote, but I think it has a very serious message. Can you share that with me?
Sure. So we went to Bolivia in 1998, and my family went with me, and we came back in 2004. And my daughters were 9, 7, and 5, and we'd spent 6.5 years in Bolivia, and none of us had really been exposed too much to American culture in those 6 years. And we've been back for several months, and my little girls came up to me one day and said, Daddy, what's erectile dysfunction? And the question shocked me, and I tried to explain what it was in a way that was acceptable to my kids. And then I asked them, why would you ask me about this? And they explained that they were seeing all these commercials on TV. And I didn't understand. And I started watching some of the shows they were watching, and I was not happy, because there are times of the day where almost every commercial on TV is for some prescription drug. And we didn't have that before I left for Bolivia. And I did research later, and in the late 90s, everything changed. The advertising, the federal government said you can change the rules in the advertising. They made it much more, the voiceovers, that used to be those Star Wars text at the bottom of that. They were not attractive, right? And years ago, I saw figures that the pharmaceutical industry was spending about $300 million a year on direct-to-consumer marketing of prescription drugs at the late 90s. And by the early 2000s, they were spending $3 billion a year, a tenfold increase. And we're one of just a couple countries in the Western Hemisphere that allow that direct marketing. Every other country says, no, that's not a good idea. And unfortunately, the pharmaceutical lobby in Washington is, if not the most powerful, it's one of the most powerful. So we're stuck with that advertising. But what it's made me realize is that as a society, we have created a reality where everybody born in the last 20 years was raised on a steady diet of, this pill will solve your problems, this chemical will make your life better. And you hear in the background that, it might also kill you, but that's not what people hear. And they just see the solutions. They see the happy people sitting in bathtubs for whatever reason or walking through a park. and they come to believe, as a society, we've come to believe that there's some chemical that's going to solve our problems.
And the notion that ask your doctor about Ozempic or ask your doctor, fill in the blank, right, is just...
That's no joke. If you're a doctor, that's no joke. And when my dad was a doctor here in San Diego, and people would come with a hurt back, and he would suggest what he thought was the best series of solutions. Now, and for many years, the patients show up, I want this. I want this opioid, not that opioid, right? And if you don't give it to me, I'm going to complain about you. In the emergency rooms, years ago, they changed the patient satisfaction surveys. And question number 2, how did this emergency department address your pain issues? So if the doctor denied somebody's pill-seeking behavior, that doctor got shredded on that survey, and the doctor's job became in jeopardy. So we put all this pressure on the medical profession to prescribe what people wanted. And then certainly, through the popular culture, recreational drug use, illegal drug use has been glamorized, far too glamorized. And then, we legalized marijuana, and that's changed a lot of things for our kids as well.
So bring us forward to the present moment with fentanyl. I think there are misconceptions about what it is and what it isn't. We were talking about things that are laced with fentanyl and how you take exception to some of that terminology. So could you paint a picture from the perspective of someone who worked in this for 30 years and then bring that into your work today in schools and in the U.S. as well as abroad?
Absolutely. So there's a clear series of events for me that explain how we got where we are. OxyContin was licensed in the mid-90s. And OxyContin, essentially, if it's abused, has the same effect on the user as heroin. So we were beginning to prescribe pharmaceutical-grade heroin, just called it OxyContin. And many people lost control of their consumption of it. And when you use an opioid, any opioid, too much, you build tolerance. It's a risk for any prescribing of opioids. So as people began to abuse OxyContin, they needed more OxyContin to get the same high. As the body gets used to it, you have to take more of the drug. And OxyContin is expensive. And so we had this unfortunate dynamic where people who never would have used heroin, ever, because they knew heroin was a nasty back alley street drug, they started using OxyContin, mistakenly thinking, well, it looks like safe because it came from a pharmacy, got so addicted, they had to start using heroin to avoid going into withdrawal sickness. So you had this population of people who never would have used heroin, all of a sudden using heroin. And then finally, the government told OxyContin, you can't make the pills like that anymore. You have to make them harder to abuse. And they did. They changed the formulation of OxyContin. But the active ingredient in OxyContin is oxycodone.
Okay. And
that comes in Percocets and roxycodone. It comes in many other forms. And we saw a very, very fast transition to this pill called roxycodone, a 30 milligram oxycodone tablet. And that's what the drug abusing population started using. Well, unfortunately, this is around 2015 or so. The cartels in Mexico saw how much money Americans were willing to spend on prescription drugs. And these pills were going for $30 a piece, these roxycodone tablets, $30 a piece. And in the DEA, we began to see counterfeit roxycodone tablets that were coming in from Mexico. And the quality was laughable. It would be like, Dave, if like you and I tried to fake an M&M and then convince our kid it's real. We're not going to be able to pull that off, right? Those first pills were laughable, and the color would come off them. And well, very quickly, the people making these things figured out how to make them right. And they're perfect copies. They're perfect copies. At first, they made them out of heroin. And then somebody discovered that if you use fentanyl, you can make these pills much less expensively. Fentanyl is an opioid. Essentially the same interaction on the body that heroin was going to have, essentially the same addiction risk. It's just 50 times more potent. And it's completely synthetic. So to manufacture heroin, you have to have poppy fields somewhere. You have to have farmers harvesting the poppy. You have to transport the poppy gum to other laboratories. It's a very big operation.
Labor intensive.
Lots of ways for people to steal from you, for you to get caught by the cops. Fentanyl is made with chemicals from drums, industrial chemicals, and can be manufactured in very, very small, either underground or industrial park labs. So there's no footprint on it, and it's dramatically less expensive. And the cartels began to sell fentanyl in America and realized Americans liked it. And so they began to fake these counterfeit pills with fentanyl. And the country's never been the same. And these pills used to go for $30 each. I'm hearing now, anecdotally, they're selling for $1 or $2 in San Diego.
So there's no
price barrier to it. And the pills, in my calculations, these pills cost the cartels just a few pennies to make. So when they were selling the pill that they made for a couple pennies for $30, I don't think there's ever been a product that's been more profitable in the history of the human history. But even at $1 or $2, they're still making more profit selling fentanyl than they're making selling anything else. And so essentially for me, it's the most powerful, cheapest, and most profitable drug ever invented. And it's flooding across our border in a tidal wave of fake pills and also in powdered bricks that look like a kilo of cocaine. So that's the two main ways it's coming in the country are in these counterfeit prescription pills that are made to look like a Xanax, made to look like an Ambien, made to look like a Vicodin, made to look like a Roxycodone, or in powder. And we're struggling as a society to deal with this because there's no cost barrier. It's gotten so inexpensive that the dealers can literally give this stuff out to get people hooked.
Now, am I right in understanding that the raw materials for these come from China? Or
most of the chemicals that currently come from China, also India, I think.
Okay.
The Chinese government has done at times taken steps to clamp down on shipping fentanyl, and I don't know if some people think it's an organized effort by the Chinese government. I'm inclined to think it's more just corruption within the Chinese economy. It's just so much money. There's so much money. And these are industrial chemicals. And the problem is the people making this stuff, the drug cartels, they've hired the Breaking Bad guy. They've hired PhD chemists. So even if we in law enforcement effectively cut off some chemical for them, they know how to manufacture that chemical from other non-controlled chemicals. Right? So tragically, in my mind, there's no way to stop this. We cannot stop this, the production of it. There was a time when we would literally fly around and look for the poppy fields, we'd eradicate the poppy fields. With fentanyl, you can't do that anymore. And I don't think we're really adjusting to that reality. I totally believe in the law enforcement mission. I'm a law enforcement guy. I want to lock up the drug dealers. But at the same time, I can look at the reality and go that at the moment, law enforcement isn't making a difference. If historically, if we had some huge seizure of cocaine or methamphetamine or heroin or something, you might see a drop in supply. You might see a rise in price. You're not seeing that now. These massive, massive seizures of fentanyl and methamphetamine at the border here, San Diego, Mexico, and the price just drops.
Which would indicate that those are maybe 10% of everything. Whatever, it's hard to estimate, right?
I spent many years on the border, and many of us who work the border think there's no way to prove this, but we think we get about 10%. On a good day, the government's stopping about 10% of what's coming in. So every giant drug seizure that I see in the headlines, I think, man, what happened to the other 9 or 10 that big that got through? But fentanyl it's a miracle drug. The legitimate form is a miracle drug. It's used in burn care, cancer care, surgery. It's a fabulous, super powerful opioid, the medical form.
Right.
Too many adults don't understand that's not the problem. The problem is now the clandestinely manufactured fentanyl, which is mostly being made in labs in Mexico, some labs in Canada. Also, there are people ordering it through the dark web, and they're manufacturing here in the U.S.
So you've made reference to this kind of global, not going to call it global malaise because that would be downplaying the significance of it. But you use the term that you talked about, a global sense of unhappiness.
People are paying attention to fentanyl because it's causing so much sudden overdose death. And it's tragic. And many, many people say we're in a fentanyl crisis. I disagree with that because we have huge numbers of people suffering from meth. Marijuana is causing a whole series of problems in our kids. For me, we're in a drug crisis. Fentanyl is the most alarming of the drugs out there at the moment. But 4 or 5 years ago, it was heroin. And 4 or 5 years before that, it was OxyContin. And there are, unfortunately, other synthetic opioids worse than fentanyl that are coming down the pike, right? But I think we have a drug problem because we have a self-medication problem. We talked about the advertising of the pharmaceuticals, and we have come to be a society that tells all of us, hey, if you're hurting, if you have anxiety, you have stress, take something for it. Take something for it. And we've come to accept that in our culture, that if we're uncomfortable, sad, lonely, depressed, whatever, but we should take something to solve that. I think we have a self-medication crisis because we have a mental unwellness crisis. I don't call it mental illness. I just think we have a lot of disconnected, confused, anxious people. And it's been verified. The CDC did some national surveys a couple of years ago, and the data is horrifying. One of the questions they asked high school students was, do you feel persistently sad and hopeless? And 44% of American teenagers told us they feel persistently sad and hopeless. And I saw
that was pre-COVID.
No.
Oh,
that was after COVID.
After COVID,
They did another survey shortly after COVID, and
Okay.
it was 44% of American teenagers. And my take on that is rather, it depresses me and saddens me. We're the richest country in the history of the world, by far. And essentially half of our future generations telling us they are persistently sad and hopeless. And when I saw those headlines and I actually read about them and I realized, okay, that data is kind of scary, I was expecting and hoping to see some sort of societal reaction. I was hoping to see school administrators and school systems and legislators get together and say, we can't accept this. And I saw nothing. I saw no change. And so our kids are telling us they're in crisis, right? Our adult population's obviously in crisis.
Right.
And yet we sit back and we scratch our heads and go, oh, what can we do? And well, my belief is when it comes to youth drug consumption, well, let's go out and educate them. Let's at least give them an accurate assessment of what's out there and what it could do to them personally by showing them what it's done to all these other people. And so that's my program is called I Choose My Future. I've been teaching the same message for 17 years. And I get in front of kids and I say, look, you are the architect of your destiny. You will make the choices that determine who you become. Let me talk to you about drugs and what all these other people, just as cool and unique and special as you, did to themselves when they either didn't know or didn't think about the consequences of using drugs.
What makes your approach different? I know, I grew up with DARE. I think when I first started teaching, we still had DARE in the schools, and this is not to cast aspersions, but I think there might have been some research that actually showed that in the long term, DARE might have had the opposite effect.
Yeah, I disbelieve that.
I'm not sure that's true. That might be part of the popular.
Oh, those claims were made.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, people did claim that.
Yeah.
But I've met a lot of adults who told me DARE worked for them.
Yeah, but what do you think explains the fact that your message resonates with young people? You don't look like them. Obviously age-wise, and you and I go to the same barber, so we stand out, and you're a big, tall guy. So generationally, you don't match. You probably don't look like their parents in many of the schools you go to. So how do they connect to you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I started doing this for my first talk was to my daughter's 5th grade class, and I talked to her class like I would talk to her. I talked to all the kids as if I were a father, and very direct. And my style of parenting is very blunt. I don't sugarcoat things. And that's what I brought into schools. And I had no intention of doing anything more than that first talk. I was very nervous. People laugh now because you can't shut me up. But back then I was actually very shy about public speaking. But it was word of mouth. Other teachers talked and I got invited back and I got invited back. And everything I've done now, I've done 1,200 presentations in 17 countries now. It's all been word of mouth. People like you see the reaction in the kids and go, wow, the kids actually listen to Rocky. Right? So it's my style as a dad that kind of opens the conversation. And then I don't look like I was a DEA agent, whatever that means. I mean, I got that throughout my entire career. I'd go to court and the jurors would say, well, you don't look like a DEA agent. Like, yeah, that's a good thing, right? But that kind of shocks the kids. I made a mistake when I first started. I started in 5th grade classes. That's when I got in my first several years. I was just talking to elementary school kids. And then I got an invitation to speak to, I think, the 10th grade at Sarah High School and in Tierra Santa. And I didn't know that some of those kids had been coming in busting in from San Diego. So these was a mature audience of 10th graders. And I made the terrible mistake of bringing my 5th grade presentation into that gym. And I got crushed. Kids were heckling me and mocking me. And, I finished and I did what I could, but I left licking my wounds. And I thought about it. Okay, all right, game on. So I added what I call my Rambo pictures, pictures of me chasing guys through the jungle and burning down drug labs and things that these kids will never do. And so I think I talk to them like I'm a dad. I try to. I make it clear from the beginning, I don't care if you like me or not. I'm here to give a message, and I demand respect. I say, you may think I'm an idiot, but you're going to listen to me. You're going to respect me. If you don't, there's the door. And then once I explain my history, then all of a sudden the kid's like, oh, this guy actually knows what he's talking about. And so I believe that, you or a school counselor or a psychologist could give exactly the same educational message. And I don't think it would resonate the same way because you haven't lived it in the way that I have. So it's a combination of things.
Do you think that the shows that like Narcos and others, there's a proliferation of these shows on TV that talk about narcos and the drug trade and international drug trade, all these things. And do you think that has a side effect or an impact of glorifying and making these lifestyles seem really glamorous? Does that help or does that hurt, do you think?
I really have a hard time with the anti-hero. I grew up on Adam 12 and Lone Ranger and Batman, and the plot line was about some guy or some woman trying to overcome, be the bad guys. And I don't know when it started, but Sopranos is a great example.
Right.
Incredible show, incredibly well produced. Great acting, great script. But I was watching it and I went, wait a second, this guy is a drug dealing pimp. And the show has us caring about his success and caring about, this is a man who subjugates women through violence and drugs for profit. I can't think, there's very few crimes in my book that are worse than that. Father of 3 daughters. And the whole prostitution pimping industry for me is really ugly. And here's a TV show glamorizing this guy. Breaking Bad. Yeah. Right? After 7 or 8 seasons, it finally ends badly for the guy. But for the first however many seasons, again, extremely well produced. I enjoyed the few episodes I watched. But they have you rooting for a guy who's producing a poison, absolutely destroying countless lives to solve his own personal problems. And we're supposed to cheer for him. And I do think that those shows have a very, very toxic effect on our kids. Ironically, there's a DEA educational foundation, and they gave the producers of Breaking Bad an award for drug education. And I saw that, like, you got to be kidding me. I don't see any drug prevention education happening in Breaking Bad. Because the kids don't associate with that. They might see it on TV. They're not. What I try to do is make them understand, this is you. These people, these pictures that I'm showing, that's you, right? That's your friend. This is not, somebody else. This is what happened to them. Sadly, probably will happen to you if you go down this road. I'm not afraid to go there. But it's, our kids are living in very confusing times. And it's interesting. I've gone some very hard places. I teach in the juvenile halls here in San Diego. I've had some opportunities to teach there. And those kids hate me when I show up. When I'm introduced, because I definitely don't look like them.
Right. I'm
an old, bald white man. And then they find out I was a Fed drug cop. They don't like me. By the time I'm done, it's amazing. I'm there for an hour, 75 minutes. Those kids are talking to me and asking questions because I've made them understand I care. I care about you. I care about your brothers and sisters. I care about your kids. And it's interesting. So another one of the collateral benefits that I think my work does is that in today's toxic times around the police, I think my work actually helps break down some of the barriers between society and the cops because these kids get to hear my perspective. And a lot of them have never talked to a cop who actually cares.
Why aren't more police departments and law enforcement agencies doing some of this work in partnership with educational entities? Or I again, thinking about Paul kind of pinging you after you retired and going, hey, can I bring you on? Like, well, why is this so unique? I mean,
every police department, I would say every major police department is doing something. They have some kind of community resource people. They have school resource officers doing something. I have a really interesting history, right? When I started doing this, DEA didn't ask me to do it. I didn't get permission to do it. I just started doing it. And
so were you were still?
Yeah, I was
still doing your other stuff.
I tried to be a good cop. I was very busy doing my investigative work, but I really believed in this. So I started doing more and more and more of this on the side. And DEA does education efforts. And some of the management I was under thought what I was doing was great and they let me do it. And then I had other managers who came in who didn't like it and didn't like me at all and tried to stop me. But by then I had such kind of momentum and a personal belief in this that I kept doing it. But the message I taught from start 17 years ago to now, it's my message. I've never gotten approval from anybody. I've never asked for permission from anybody. I teach the kids what I think they need to hear. And that kind of makes me unique inside of a school district or an organization, because what's taught by police department, it's going to be approved by management. It's going to be committee designed. There's going to be people very concerned. Hey, we don't want to trigger the students. We don't want to upset anybody. Right. Schools 10 years ago, I would go give a briefing to high school counselors 10 years ago. And some of them would say, Rocky, you're going to talk about these things. You're going to trigger some of our students emotionally. We can't have you come in. And my response is, if I don't trigger every student emotionally, then I failed. So if you're not down with me triggering your students emotionally, teaching this in an emotional way, then that's cool. Don't invite me. Invite these other people. There's great people doing it differently than I do. But I routinely get kids crying, running out of the assemblies. And the schools that use me understand we agree. The schools that use me, we agree. If for this kind of teaching to be effective and to stick with the kids, then it has to be taught in a very powerful and emotional way. And many people in society aren't on board with that yet.
I thought it was interesting in my research to see, as you mentioned, 17 different countries I think you've worked in. And clearly, depending on which country you're in, the perspectives on the drug crisis and whose quote unquote fault it is are different, right? I could imagine in the U.S. there's a lot of finger pointing south.
Yeah.
How does that work when you go to Mexico?
Well, it's interesting. 2018, I hadn't done any teaching in Mexico, and I was teaching in Central America, and I speak Spanish fluently. I sound like a gringo, but I can communicate effectively. But I wanted to teach in Mexico, and I tried to organize something in Tijuana, which that year I think again was the most violent city on the planet. Yeah. San Diego's sister city, most violent city on the planet. And when I mentioned to people in DEA that I wanted to do that, most of them mocked me. They said, "That's ridiculous. You know, they're not going to let you. It's during the Trump years, the wall. They're going to hate you. They're going to hate what you represent. No one's going to let you talk to any kids." Well, I got a guy to loan me a gymnasium in Tijuana, and 2 universities sent 1,200 students. And I have a picture of those 1,200 students, you know, cheering and shouting, "I choose my future." Because guess what? If you're living in Tijuana, you're tired of it being the most violent city in the planet.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. And what I do in Mexico, I'll ask my Mexican youth audiences, high school, middle school, and college. I ask them, who's responsible for paying for all the drug violence in Mexico? And they'll all say the American drug user, el consumidor gringo. They all say that instantly. But if I ask that same question of a youth audience in San Diego, I get a bunch of blank stares because we're not having that conversation. Many people in our society are pointing the finger at Mexico and blaming Mexico for our drug problem, pointing the finger at China, blaming China for our fentanyl problem. And yes, Mexico and China must do much more. However, I don't see how it's China forcing our high school kids to choose to use a counterfeit pill or to choose to buy some powder drug that could kill them. That's a choice that our population is making, and that choice is financing the drug violence across the planet. And unfortunately, we don't want to take ownership of that reality. And I feel very lonely saying that publicly because I don't hear anybody else really saying it. Certainly nobody important is saying it. And yet for me, it's not even an arguable point. I mean, I have a picture I used of $27 million that was on U.S. cash. It was on a boat going to Colombia. And a DEA agent took that off the boat away from a cartel. And that money was going to cause a lot of violence in Colombia. Every piece of money, every single bill of money came from the pocket of some drug buyer somewhere in America. And yet, so if we're not willing to have that honest conversation, are we really being honest about trying to solve it? My answer to that is no. We're not being honest about trying to solve it. In the 17 years I've been teaching, I've been desperately waiting for society to kick me to the curb. Seriously, and I still wait for that. I'm waiting for society to say, "You know what, Rock, we got it. We're going to do something much better than what you do for the kids. We don't need you anymore." Now, I'll be so happy if that ever happens. But you know what? I don't think we're any closer to it now than we were 17 years ago, even though the statistics on death and suffering and overdose are just skyrocketing.
Is it apathy and thinking it's someone else's kid that won't happen to someone who looks like me? Or are there other forces? I'm not a big conspiracy theorist. I tend to think that big entities are dysfunctional and are fundamentally unable and incapable of conspiring.
Chaos theory.
Yeah, exactly. But so what are the forces that are arrayed against this? Because it's just a puzzling thing for me.
I think there's 3. I think the 3 come to mind right now. One is that I'm too good of a parent. My kids are too smart. You know, this just isn't going to happen to my family, right? I think that, unfortunately, that dynamic is really pervasive. I'll do parent events, and nobody shows up. And with all the headlines and all the suffering, the parents just don't show up. Free event that's catered, and parents don't show up.
Right.
I think that's number 1. Number 2, I think we have a societal stigma against drug users. I think we have a very ugly stigma where we blame the user, right? Even very young ones. Because but for that stigma, I can't explain our lack of reaction. I mean, it was 10,000 Americans a year were dying from overdose when I started DEA in 1990, just under 10,000. When I started teaching in 2017, it had climbed to 37,000 a year, which shocked me. And every year after that it kept climbing 5,000 or 6,000 a year, I kept wondering when society would react, and I didn't see a reaction. And I used to say rhetorically, does it have to reach 100,000 before we care?
Right.
And well, 3 years ago, we did go over 100,000, and there was no change. So now it's not 10,000 a year dying, it's almost 10,000 a month. And society hasn't reacted. And so the only way I can explain that lack of reaction is sort of just like, well, shame on them or something, which I don't agree with. So number one, number two, and number three, we want quick solutions. We have become a society that demands quick fixes. And there is no quick fix for this. The current drug crisis that we're in started with really everything changed in 1995 with OxyContin. So it's taken us 30 years to get here. And tragically, it might take us a very, very long time to get out of where we are. But I have been saying every year, and I'm saying it right now, if we don't collectively start doing a whole lot more to educate our kids to not start using it, we're going to be very sorry in a couple of years or 5 years.
I heard a statistic, and I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but that we're approaching the same number of overdose deaths as number of individuals who died annually in the U.S. during the height of the AIDS crisis.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of comparisons,
Yeah, but it's interesting, right? It's like what triggered.
Well, we shut our economy down. We shut our economy down. We shut our schools down for COVID, and
right.
I don't know the actual death numbers from COVID, but I don't. Was it 10,000 a month? I don't know. But this problem is growing. It's not static. It's getting worse, and I think because it doesn't offer an easy solution, we don't have a lot of politicians really interested in trying to find that solution.
Are there other countries around the world where fentanyl and the other precursor drugs are, where the abuse and the death is at the same level?
No.
Are we the global leaders?
We want to. It's my belief, my opinion, that we drug ourselves more than any other culture, right? And to me, you can't make these apple-to-apple comparisons between the U.S. and other countries because we have a lot of weird things about our culture that other countries don't share.
Sure.
But there's UNAM is Mexico's biggest public university, and they put a study out claiming 90% of teenagers in Mexico are suffering emotional distress right now. And as I was in Uzbekistan teaching a couple months ago, and kids there are feeling anxiety and stress. So this youth mental unwellness crisis that's so big here in the U.S. is not just here. It's everywhere. Everywhere else I'm going, it's happening. And so you have a youth population that's watching the same movies and TV shows and TikToks and popular culture telling them, hey, if you're hurting, take something. There's a chemical solution. And a lot of controversy around fentanyl consumption in Mexico. I personally think it's much greater than the government admits to.
But less than here.
Well, less than here, but growing.
Growing.
I just 2 days ago did a webinar for a bunch of doctors in El Salvador that they organized because they're seeing fentanyl now show up in their clinics in El Salvador. I was teaching kids in Guatemala 2 years ago. And in my presentation, I show pictures of some of the counterfeit pills. And the medical staff of the region of Guatemala I was in had never even heard of fentanyl. And yet when I showed the kids these pictures of the fake pills, the reaction of the kids made it clear they've seen them. Right? So there's no way for this tidal wave of fake pills, this fentanyl pills, to be pushing up to the United States without a whole bunch of it also, flowing back down into Mexico and other countries. So with many of the drug trends, what starts in the U.S. spreads. I've got some friends in Australia who understand that very deeply. They're very worried because they know that, what starts here 10 years later shows up big time in Australia. And nobody's really, everywhere I travel, drug prevention is, if it happens at all, is sporadic, certainly not a priority.
One of the things that I think has been effective in conversations that I've heard you have on podcasts is where you talk about your own kids, and that they, like many teenagers, experimented with smoking pot and trying it, and I think that's something that probably resonates with kids and with audiences, right? That you're not coming from a judging perspective, right? Like, your kids are human and my kid's human, and they do things, they try things, and especially because the brain doesn't fully develop until whatever it is, age 25, and I sometimes wonder if 25 is the right number on that. And I think that probably lends some credence to the things you say to kids, because you're not coming from a judging perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And I try to be as authentic. I did 2 1,000 student assemblies at El Cajon High School last Friday. And it's not easy, right? That's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
For 90-minute assemblies.
Yeah.
And there were some hecklers, but for the most part, I keep the kids engaged. And my belief is the teenagers are the world masters at smelling BS.
Oh yeah, and,
right?
and instant BS detector.
Instantly,
They're just like,
yeah,
no.
right. So if I have to be very careful. What I teach isn't easy because I'm challenging very powerful assumptions in the kids. But I've done 1,200 of these things, and I know what I'm talking about. And I believe that I successfully get through my presentations without setting off the BS meter. And I'll never know how many kids actually listen to me or believe me. But I do believe that most of the kids who sit through my assemblies at least believe that I believe what I'm teaching. But yeah, I'm willing to talk. I'm willing to talk about my daughters, and each of my 3 daughters made some really stupid decisions along the way. One of my daughters graduated college not that long ago, and my heart froze because she was anxious and being prescribed Xanax, and she explained to me that one time she ran out of Xanax and her prescription ran out, and she bought some from a dorm mate, and my heart froze because I just met a teacher up in Vista whose son is gone because he did exactly the same thing. So it's a miracle my own child, is still with me. So I talk about my own mistake and being too engaged in my work and not paying enough attention to my kids, right? And I say, many of your parents are making the same mistake that I made. So yeah, so I think it's that willingness to be authentic with the kids that keeps them listening to me.
If your own kids wanted to pursue a career in law enforcement and follow your footsteps into the DEA, would you be in favor of that? Not that you can control your kids that much, because I'm a parent and I get it. They don't listen to us sometimes, but would that be something you'd be proud of them doing?
My oldest did. My oldest
okay.
was a San Diego County sheriff, and then she became a patrol officer up in her town in Idaho. And she resigned last year. And just didn't like how the job was changing her. Several of her mentors in law enforcement had decided to retire early or leave early. And that's brutal. When the people you bond with,
Yep.
the veterans that you bond with, when they bail out,
they're like, I'm buying a bass fishing boat.
I'm going
done.
to become a gardener or whatever.
Yep.
And you're looking forward. And she's like, you know what, Dad, I did it. And she was worried that I would judge her. But honestly, I stopped losing sleep. She was doing graveyard shifts, so she would call me at 6:30 in the morning and share with me things that had happened. And as much as I was worried about her leaving law enforcement, I sleep better.
How did you maintain your sense of humanity and hope and optimism, especially working 6 years overseas? I mean, I've heard you describe it as, there's some pretty great fringe benefits of being a federal law enforcement officer in a foreign country, kind of standard of living, benefits and perks that come with that. But at the end of the day, you're doing work that exposes you to really tough things, right? Law enforcement in another country, probably seeing really tough things. How did you maintain your humanity so that years later, even though at that time you weren't planning this, but that you could come and work with kids?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess one of the things that our society does, they give federal law enforcement more credit than we deserve, right? Because we're plain clothes, we can investigate. We go out with a group of people if we need to arrest somebody. I have mad respect for uniformed law enforcement. My daughter working in the jail or driving a squad car by herself in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And she was my daughter. In just a few years, she was a cop. Saw more ugliness than I saw in my 30 years. Right, and that's just so true. The paramedics and the firemen today, the things that they have to see every day, and then the cops, and with all the conflict around the job now and all the complications of the job, and so I don't feel it was that hard to keep my humanity as a federal agent compared to the struggle that I think a lot of uniformed first responders have. But I took this job because I wanted to help our country. I didn't take this job to arrest bad guys. I thought by doing this job, I'd be helping our society. Hard to see that we made any difference at all. The drug problem is 10 times worse now than it was. I arrested some bad guys, but they're all out of jail now, And I was giving a talk at an immigrant event in San Ysidro, and this fairly new immigrant from Central America came up to me afterwards in Spanish, and he hugged me, and he goes, "Rocky, that thing you did for 30 years, that was your training for your real job." And I gave him a big hug, and I laughed because I never thought about that, But honestly, I couldn't do the work I'm doing now if I hadn't done. And I like my career. I'm not unhappy with my career choice. I just wish I could look back and say, wow, we made a difference. And I don't really feel personally that I did.
It's interesting. This is my 30th year in education. And, you get to a place in your life where certain themes start recycling, right? Challenges that you faced 30 years ago seem to have gone away for a while, and then they come back, or sometimes they never went away, and you seem like you're just beating on this same thing, and then you start to question, was it all worth it or not? And I think we're all going to have impacts that hopefully are positive, and we won't even know about them. Maybe, right? You get people coming up to you and thanking you for things, and there are probably a lot of people who you impacted who never get a chance to say thank you.
Yeah. Well, as a DEA agent, it's a pretty destructive job, right? I'm just taking people to jail, right? But a lot of the people I'm taking to jail, they have children who love them too.
Yep.
And I do my search warrants, and I'm traumatizing the kids in these houses, and it's an important job, but it's a destructive job. And yeah, now at this high school in San Diego last week, I had several dozen kids come up crying and hug me, and the kids share with me this horrible sadness they live, but they want to share with me, right? And I actually had to go to therapy. I was going to therapy last year because these kids would come up and just sharing horrible things with me. One little girl, 11 years old. I was at an elementary school here in town, and a bunch of kids came up, and I've done enough of these now. When I see the kids who are kind of standing back, I have to harden my heart a little bit. There's a bunch of kids who want to come up, shake my hand, or get a picture or selfie or something, and there's kids waiting. I'm like, oh no, they're waiting for a reason. So this little girl waits for everyone else to leave. School left me alone with her, which they shouldn't have done. But anyway, she comes up, and she says, Rocky, thank you. I said, what are you thanking me for? And she goes, you taught me the abuse is the beer's fault. It's not my fault. And she explained her dad is actively, an abusive drunk, this beautiful 11-year-old little girl. And I didn't know the kid's name, right? So I take a selfie with her, and it's like I make sure the school district.
Because you're a mandated reporter.
Right, but if I don't know her name,
of course, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So my solution for that is I make sure the school knows.
Right.
But my instinct as a man, as a dad, as a cop, is to look at my watch and go, well, I've got some free time. Where does he park his car? Right. I mean, seriously, my instinct is I'm going to go have a conversation with him right now.
Right.
Another little girl came up to me, San Ysidro, 11 years old, crying, and goes, Rocky, I have a brain tumor. And my stepdad won't stop smoking weed around me. And I had the same kind of, I want to own that. I want to fix it. And of course I can't. So anyway, I went to some therapy, and I've figured out how to kind of not absorb that. And I have a line I use with the kids. This little girl last week told me how she's born drug addicted. And I almost wish she would stop. As she's sharing with me her life, I wish she'd stop. It was so horrible. And this beautiful child, you'd never know by looking at her. And then when she's done, I said, look, I can't even comprehend the suffering you've gone through. It's so unfair, it's so unjust what you've gone through. But I'm going to tell you something. You have a superpower. And I pointed at her heart. In your heart, you have a superpower. Because and I gestured to the rest of the kids, you understand human suffering and frailty and brokenness better than anybody else here. And if you decide to turn that into something that helps other kids who suffer, you will be an amazing healer. And it's incredible, Dave, to see the look in their eyes. They're crying, and their eyes are flickering as they're processing. Yeah. I'm telling them, this horrible thing you just shared with me can make you an amazing healer if you go that route. So I try to leave all the kids a little bit hopeful, when I'm done talking to them.
Do you run into conflicts or get pushback from educators? You don't need to mention names of schools or anything, but law enforcement is not always a welcome presence in schools or on campuses. And even if maybe administration gives permission, are there other educators who you have some friction with, or do the adults kind of step back and let you work with the kids?
Well, the schools that I visit, it's been approved by management.
Right.
So whether the staff agrees with it or not.
Right.
But I've had people over the years tell me to my face that they disapprove because of my background. Mm-hmm. I've had a lot of people come to me and share with me things they've heard others say when I'm not present. So it's a very real thing. I can't speculate, but a significant percentage of people currently in education in America have a belief that cops really can't bring anything of value to students. I used to get invited to lecture the Master's in Social Work program at San Diego State University until I was uninvited. And some years ago, a young woman
I won't ask you why.
Well, I talk about the bad guys, right? When I'm arresting the bad guys, I'm putting the bad guys in jail. And this young woman goes, well, to whom are you referring when you say bad guys? I say the drug dealers. And man, it all went downhill fast, right? Because how dare you call them bad guys? I'm like, they're selling poison in their communities, right? So we got this big argument. And I realized that this class of 30 students getting a master's in social work, all of them had this very powerful bias against the profession that I represented. And the reason I was uninvited, I believe, was I said to them, look, you're clearly sharing an anti-law enforcement bias with me, which concerns me, because in your actual social work, in your casework, sometimes law enforcement will be the only solution to that problem. The abusive father, whatever's going on, right? There's going to be solutions where law enforcement has to solve it. And I said, if you're dogmatically opposed to ever engaging with law enforcement, you're going to be doing a disservice to your clients. Man, they were not happy. And I didn't get invited back, but I absolutely believe that, 100% believe that. And unfortunately, ideology is powerful. It's still difficult for me to get into many schools. So, but I'm done fighting the world.
Right.
I for years I would fight and argue and
Right.
triangulate, and I don't now. I'm very, very busy, and I wish someone like me could get in front of every kid.
Right.
But I can just do what I can do, and I don't have the energy to fight. So I give every audience of kids in front of me, I give them the best show that I can give. I joke that I'm the Willie Nelson of drug prevention. I've done 1,200 of these. I have to show up and make every audience of kids think that they're my favorite audience.
Right.
And I tell them the same jokes and the same stories and all that every single time. But at the same time, my product is evolving. I mean, I've done 1,200 different presentations. I'm always listening to the kids. I'm always looking at what's going on in society, always looking for better ways to express, the message. So another reason that I'm successful is like it stays very relevant. I never ever leave an assembly going, oh, that was great. I'm always leaving my assemblies going, oh, darn, I didn't mention that. Dang it. I forgot to do that, or I could have said that better.
Yeah, the whole question around the role of law enforcement in schools, it's obviously complicated, and but we've the times in my career when we've had to engage law enforcement to come and keep our campuses safe, whether it was having the police come or whether it was hiring private armed security because we had a threat or we had graduation and someone had said they were going to do something at graduation. People are universally thankful. And so it's an interesting thing, right? That the same people who, I've had this experience where I had teachers actually come up to me and say, thank you so much for having some armed presence at graduation. That way I could relax. And I thought cops were bad, and so.
Yeah, there's a lot of people are disconnecting. They're just not connecting the dots. But there are many people who look at me and go, there's no way you're going to be able to engage this group of students.
Yeah.
So I have one story that I talk about a lot. Some years ago, we have 2 juvenile prisons in San Diego, one in Kearney Mesa and one out in Otay Mesa. And one of my friends worked in the probation department, was like a guard at this juvenile prison in Otay Mesa. And in the middle of the night, she's doing an overnight shift. She sends me this email, and it was just the saddest email. Like, Rocky, I don't know what to do. This is the worst group of young men we've ever had. That's saying something.
Yeah.
This is a veteran. She's been in this 20 years.
Yeah,
This
that's a
is the
low
worst.
bar.
Yeah. And so this long email, and she goes, they benefit so much from your message, but honestly, they hate everybody. She's just like emoting, not just telling me. So I woke up and I read it the next morning, and I wrote her back, put me in, coach. And a week later, I was in front of those kids, Dave. And I years ago, I had a chance to go teach in the MS-13 neighborhoods in El Salvador. And the general of the police gave me his personal bodyguards. And there was a guy with a machine gun in uniform standing next to me in front of every audience of kids to keep me alive. And those gang kids treated me with more respect than these kids here in Otay. And they were cursing at me, dropping F-bombs and flipping me off. And you can't do that in juvie, right? There's strict rules. But nobody was stopping the kids. And it was bad. It was bad. They were absolutely committed to driving me out the door with verbal abuse. And I went to one of the guards, can I get some help here? And the guard goes, hey, you volunteered for this, good luck. And I realized, snap, the guards have given up.
Yeah.
Everybody's given up on these kids.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, all right. So I'll do this. There's a video I show that's pretty powerful that shows overdoses. And I thought they'll calm down. They didn't. The verbal abuse continued the whole time. It was unbelievable. And I don't quit anything I set out to do, but my inner voice was like, dude, this is just dumb. But I didn't quit. And that was the magic. Because by the end, it was different. By the end, I managed to convince all these 15, 16-year-old kids locked up in a prison. And this is not a camp. This is like cell blocks.
Okay.
These kids are in a prison at 15. I convinced them of something. I'm trying to prevent them. Because it's not an accident that a 15-year-old ends up in prison for violent crimes. Things were done to him were not done for him.
Right.
Repeatedly. And all of that connected to drug abuse. So in this hour, I was able to convince these angry young men of that and make them realize that I'm trying to prevent the future versions of them. And you can't take pictures in juvie, right?
Right.
But I said, guys, if you believe in my message, will you stand for a picture? And I have a picture of these guys standing at attention, arms behind their backs, And they all volunteered to stand to show support. These are guys who respect nobody.
Right.
But at the end of my session, they were showing respect for this message. And I'm very proud of that. And what I explained when I show that picture in like a comprehensive high school, I said, look, if I manage to get these angry, cynical, wounded, incarcerated young men to find some value in what I'm teaching, I'm optimistic that somebody here today is going to get some value from this.
Are you ever afraid in foreign countries traveling? I mean, the irony is not lost on me that you're doing anti-drug messages in Mexico, and clearly the mafia that controls all of this knows you're there in some capacity. It's probably hard to go anywhere with that message that they don't know you're there. I mean, maybe you're untouchable a little bit because of the federal agent piece, but how do you feel when you're there?
Well, there are places I won't go.
Okay.
Right? I'm not insane.
Yeah, I'm not going to name some of those states, but
No,
I
but
think
there
I know.
are places
I'm
that
probably thinking the same place.
Well, even in Tijuana. I mean, there's places I'll go in Tijuana, and there's parts of Tijuana I won't visit.
Yeah.
Right? They're just too far out of government control. But no, I am the only former DEA agent who goes stands up publicly. I don't have guards. I don't have any official status. I'm there as a tourist. I stand up publicly and say, yeah, I was a DEA agent. But I'm not worried. I won't ever say it's zero risk.
Right.
But honestly, the drug cartel bosses, they don't want their kids using drugs either.
That's right.
Right? And that's a great irony that many people don't understand. Right. The people who actually run the drug trade don't use it.
No.
And they don't let their people use it, because anybody who uses hard drugs, or even like an alcoholic, right? They're not reliable. No. And if there's one business in the world where you're going to make sure your people are reliable, it's the drug trafficking.
That's why the mafia used to have those strict
Absolutely.
rules. It fell apart, but
I don't know. I think the people in charge, you're done. If you become unreliable,
they'll take care of you.
It's a very unforgiving business.
Yep.
Right? So, but also, I do think, when I was overseas for those 6 years, everywhere in the world, people still remember Kiki Camarena, who was murdered, and they remember the very, very aggressive reaction of the U.S. government to that. And I honestly think that still keeps us kind of safe today. And I think that even if there were somebody out there that thought, well, I'm going to go shut that guy up, talking about me, might have some concern like, shoot, if I hurt that guy, I don't want DEA coming after me.
Yeah.
But I'm supported by prominent people in Mexico. I don't set this stuff on my own. People create these opportunities for me. They bring me down. So. And this may sound crazy, but I mean, if that's how I have to go because somebody decided that my talk was intolerable, well, okay.
Yeah.
But kids are telling me that they're listening. Kids are telling me that I'm making a difference for them. And so I'm going to keep doing it.
You've been very, very generous with your time. I just have a couple more questions. I wanted to ask you about fencing.
Redwood, cedar, what are you talking about here?
This kind of fencing.
Sword fencing, yes.
Sword fencing. You've talked about it previous, and it just intrigued me. The lessons in fencing, you were competitive?
Yeah, so I started fencing in college. Started when I was 18, got very good. Best I ever got came, I was 20th in the U.S., which, not too important, but, after just a couple of years, I got pretty good. And then I came in DEA right out of college. I regret that. I wish I'd taken some time to try to compete, go to the Olympics or something, but I didn't. I was just too eager to get my career started. But I went to Bolivia and I took my fencing gear because that was my main hobby. Not even aware if there was fencing in Bolivia. But I took my stuff thinking, well, maybe I'll find some. It turns out they have a small but very active program, and I entered and I won, and I became the Bolivian national fencing champion. So as an American diplomat, law enforcement officer working in Bolivia, I was twice asked by Bolivia to represent them in South American championships. And I still have my sweatsuits with the Bolivia
That's awesome.
on the back. Yeah. But, it's just my main pastime and hobby. And in 2011 here in San Diego, I saw how many Marines were coming back from Afghanistan just destroyed. We had 2 battalions of Marines that just got really crushed in southern Afghanistan. And they're here at the Naval Hospital. And I started thinking about these guys. And, one day they're Rambo, and the next day they wake up in diapers, intubated in some hospital somewhere. And how brutal that's going to be on their psyche. And I looked around at different para sports, and the only combat sport that really made sense to me was fencing, because there's wheelchair fencing. And you're not jousting. The wheelchairs are in a platform, and you fence off the sides of them. So I went to the local naval hospital here in San Diego, and I asked if I could teach it, and they let me. So my friend Stu Lee and I went in for 3 years, and we worked with guys who had been blown up just 6 or 8 weeks before. And that has a lot to do, I think, with where I am today. I got a lot of accolades for that. Oh, you're such a great guy. You're going and working with these vets. I got so much more back from those guys. 2 of my students were triple amputees.
Wow.
And one of my friends, this guy, Andrew Botrell, triple amputee. And I saw him a few years ago, and he had a new truck, really nice new Toyota truck. And I noticed there was no handicap plate. Triple amputee. And I said, Andrew, where's your handicap? He goes, I'm not handicapped. Right? And I'm like, dang, that's so working with all those guys kind of helped me, realize that I was taking a lot of things for granted. Right. And while I have my health and while I have my mind and while I have people like you giving me a chance to spread my message, I'm not going to let, too many obstacles, defeat my motivation and my spirit.
Is there anything that we have not touched on today that's kind of rattling around in your head?
Well, if anybody's listened this long, I want to thank them.
Yeah.
But a message I have for every parent who's listening: you're not safe. You're not safe from the drug problem. The drug threat cuts across every demographic. Doesn't matter where you live. Doesn't matter your income level, your racial background, what you do for a living. You're not safe. And this is striking families across America. And I think too many parents somehow think that they can insulate themselves from this problem. And maybe you can, but at some point your kids are going to be out there in the world. And initiate the conversations. While going to school, I'll get an hour or 90 minutes in the year. Well, that's not very effective, right? The true conversations need to happen in the home. And I think too many parents are unwilling to have those conversations. So one of the things the County Office of Education has done, Dr. Gotthold created this amazing project. We created 6 chapter videos of my message. It took about a year to do it, but they are pretty high quality, and they're about 15 to 20 minutes long. They're freely available on our website. On
the San Diego County Office of Ed website.
Yeah, and I'll give you the link so you can put it out with this podcast. Yep. But the link is actually www.sdcoe.net/ichoose. And my advice to any parent listening to this: start young. Don't wait till your kids in high school. Don't wait till they're middle school. Many schools in San Diego are bringing my presentation down to 5th grade. My presentation that used to be considered too strong for high school, there are elementary schools asking me to give it to 5th graders now because they understand that's when drug use is starting in their student population. So sit down with your kids, watch these videos. And when the video's over, say, hey, did that guy Rocky, does it make any sense? Is that actually what you were seeing? And make your home, make you a safe place to have this conversation, because your kids aren't probably going to start it. And they don't know what they don't know. So, lean into the problem. We've got a lot of resources. My contact information will be involved here. I'll answer anybody's questions. I'm here as a resource for anybody who's listening.
Thank you so much, Rocky. It's been a real pleasure. I saw you present in person a number of years ago, pre-COVID, here at Albert Einstein Academies. And then for one reason or another, we kind of took a break, and we're going to definitely have to have you back. And I've really appreciated your message today and learning about your work and just this kind of second career that you've got, right, that came after your first 30 years of preparation, as the young man said in San Ysidro. So thank you so much.
Thanks for the opportunity, Dave.
Thank you for listening to the Superintendent's Hangout. You can follow me on Twitter at DVS1970. Please be sure to share this show with friends and family on social media and in the real world. Thank you to Brad Bacayal for editing and production assistance, and to Tina Royster for scheduling and logistics. Thanks for hanging out, and have a great day.